They called him Kage, not because that was his name, but because no one dared speak the real one. A Ronin with a ruined face, a past burned from the imperial archives, and a silence so heavy that even warriors avoided standing too close. 20 samurai had fought 7 days for Princess Ayame's hand, men of flawless lineage, perfect form, and reputations polished by generations of privilege. Everyone knew the outcome. Everyone expected the same old story. Everyone believed tradition would choose the realm's future. But when the drums fell silent and all eyes turned to the princess, she did something no one in that hall, not even the Shogun, expected. She stepped past the finest warriors of her age, past their armor, their elegance, their bloodlines, and pointed to the darkest corner of the chamber, to the scarred man who had not been invited, to the Ronin no clan would claim, to the outcast whose smile looked like a warning. And in that frozen moment, while nobles gasped and warriors reached for their swords, one question cut through the hall sharper than any blade. Why him? Why choose the monster over the 20 legends? A question that would only be answered in blood, but not the blood the court expected. If you're enjoying this beginning and want to see more stories like this, make sure to like the video and subscribe. It helps the channel grow and tells YouTube that this content matters. And I'd love to know where you're watching from, so drop the name of your city in the comments. Let's continue the story. The palace had never been so alive. 7 days of exhibitions, 7 days of duels, 7 days of elegant displays meant to celebrate the ideal samurai. 20 finalists now stood in a line, so perfectly aligned that it looked carved into the floor itself. They were the sons of dynasties, heirs of clans whose banners had survived centuries of war. Their armor was polished until it captured the lantern light like gold. Their reputations were so spotless that even the poets had run out of new ways to praise them. Everyone already knew which of them Princess Ayame would choose. Everyone, except Ayame. She moved not toward the golden line of champions, but away from it. Away from the ornamental armor. Away from the carefully curated perfection. Away from everything tradition had told her she must desire. Her steps carried her toward the dim edge of the hall, toward the places people only looked at when something had gone wrong. Servants paused. Guards straightened. Courtiers exchanged confused whispers. Why is the princess walking toward the shadows? Kage had been standing exactly where he always stood, where no one could see him, unless they were trying very hard to. His clothing was simple, worn, and deliberately unremarkable. His presence was the kind of thing the court tolerated only because it forgot he was there. But Princess Ayame had not forgotten him. When she stopped in front of him, the entire palace seemed to lean forward. "You. Step forward." Gasps moved like wind across the chamber. Not outrage, not yet, but disbelief so sharp it paralyzed even the Shogun's most seasoned advisors. A Ronin, a man who hadn't even been allowed to stand among the candidates. A man whose real name no one dared utter. No one understood what Ayame was doing. No one except Ayame. Kage lifted his face. The room recoiled, but Ayame did not. His left eye, clouded and dead, reflected the lanterns like pale moonlight. His scars were not dramatic, they were uncomfortable. Not the marks of heroic battles, but the layered damage of someone who had survived things no one in that room wanted to imagine. Yet the princess didn't flinch. She studied him with a quiet, focused intention that made the samurai in the golden line shift uneasily. She knew something. "State your name," she commanded. Kage's voice came out rough, shaped by an old injury. "I have no name this court would honor." There it was, the enormity of what she was doing. Choosing a man who was nothing by every measure that mattered. A man without lineage, connections, or a place in the world. Ayame didn't blink. "Then I will speak the truth that others chose not to record." Her voice carried across the hall. Each word measured. "I saw you at Shimizu Bridge." The temperature in the room changed. The Shimizu incident had been officially recorded as a minor skirmish, but Ayame, unlike the rest of the court, had noticed the inconsistencies, the missing guards, the impossible timing. She had traced the truth through the silence no one else bothered to investigate. Kage stiffened. "Coincidence," he said. "I was passing by." Ayame ignored the deflection. "And the harbor poisoning." 3 foreign agents eliminated before daylight. The contamination contained before reaching the palace district. You were there. Kage's response was flat. I was buying fish. The courtiers watched, horrified and fascinated. The princess was unveiling truths that were never meant to be spoken. Then she spoke the third piece, the one that made even seasoned commanders pale. And the mountains. Lord Takeda's kidnapped son. You returned him alive. For a moment, the room forgot who the finalists even were. Ayame turned, facing the 20 warriors. When she spoke again, her voice carried unmistakable authority. Most of you have never survived a real attempt on your life. Your victories were earned in arenas, not in blood. The finalists straightened in indignation, but her words cut too cleanly to be dismissed. Then she faced Kage again, and this time her tone softened without weakening. Tell them why no clan claims you. Kage hesitated, not out of fear, but because some truths carved wounds that never healed. He finally spoke. I killed my father. The hall collapsed into silence. He explained, briefly, plainly, the famine, the cruelty, the order to kill peasants who had simply starved. And the moment he realized that letting his father live would be the true crime. Ayame listened without judgment, and the court understood something very uncomfortable. The scarred Ronin was not the monster. He was the mirror. When he finished, Ayame delivered the choice that would shake the realm. She raised her hand and pointed to him. The hall shattered into outrage. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then the hall exploded. Protests rose like a storm breaking against stone. Lords shouted about precedent. Advisors invoked ancient laws that no one had quoted in decades. One samurai actually stepped forward as if to physically pull the princess's hand away from pointing at Kage, then stopped when he realized he'd be reaching toward the shogun's daughter in front of the shogun himself. Only two people remained completely still, Ayame, with her hand extended. Kage, with his hands at his sides, as if accepting a sentence. The shogun lifted his hand, and the noise died in layers. Even outrage remembered how to bow. Ayame, he said, using her name instead of her title. That alone unsettled the court. Do you understand what you are doing? His voice was not angry. That was worse. Anger would have been familiar. This was evaluation. Ayame lowered her hand, but did not step away from Kage. You granted me the right to choose, father. I am exercising it. The shogun's gaze moved to Kage. For the first time in years, the Ronin met that gaze directly. There was no hatred there. No warmth either. Only calculation. He did. The man you point to, the shogun said slowly, has no name in this court. He is a tool I use when I must do things I cannot admit were done. He walks where light does not reach. He kills what must be killed so that others may keep their hands clean. The revelation sent a ripple through the ranks of samurai. Some looked at Kage with disgust, others with discomfort. A few, very few, with something like respect. Ayame did not flinch. Exactly, she replied. That is why I choose him. A man in ornate armor stepped forward from the line of 20. He bowed to the shogun, then to Ayame, but there was steel in his posture. Shogun, he said, with your permission, Lord Takamori was the center of every story that had been told about this tournament. 6 generations of service, countless duels, a record of battlefield decisions that tutors forced into the skulls of every young officer. If anyone had entered the hall certain of victory that morning, it was him. The shogun regarded him with weary familiarity. Speak, Lord Takamori. I do not question the princess's right to choose. Takamori began, which was, of course, exactly what he was doing. But I question whether this man can bear what that choice demands. His gaze found Kage and measured him head to toe. He is a blade you send in the dark, not a pillar you place in full sight. A husband must stand before the realm. A future advisor must command the respect of warriors. How can a man with no name lead men whose names are written on shrines? It was a fair question, a dangerous one, a necessary one. Ayame answered before the shogun could. You all respect one thing, she said, looking directly at the line of samurai. Victory, silence. She stepped aside so that nothing stood between Kage and the 20 finalists. You competed in controlled conditions, she continued. Rules, judges, prestige. That is one kind of test. Her eyes returned to Kage. He has lived another kind entirely. Takamori's hand settled on the hilt of his sword. Then let us test both kinds. He bowed again, this time more shallowly. I invoke the right of personal challenge. His voice carried clearly to every corner. If the Ronin would take what I have earned by every law and custom of our class, let him prove, with steel, that he deserves it. Several advisors shifted, ready to argue technicalities, but the Shogun spoke first. Ayame chose the man. You challenged the choice. He leaned back, eyes half closed, not in fatigue, but in focus. Very well. It will be answered in front of the same eyes that watched the tournament. I allow it. This story would go to blood. Kage said nothing, which someone might have mistaken for fear. Ayame knew better. Silence, for him, was not hesitation. It was calculation. She stepped closer, just enough for him to hear her without the rest of the court catching every word. If you refuse, they'll say I chose a coward, she murmured. If you accept and lose, they'll say I was foolish. If I accept and win, he replied quietly, they'll say the world is breaking. He didn't sigh. Kage never wasted that much breath. But something in his shoulders shifted, which, to be fair, it is. He moved forward. The space was cleared with brutal efficiency. Courtiers retreated to the edges. The golden line of finalists split in half, forming a wide ring around the center of the chamber. Servants rushed to roll back carpets, revealing polished wooden floor. A dual space, improvised where a throne room had been. Takamori stepped into the circle like a man entering his natural element. His draw was smooth, the steel of his katana whispering free with a sound almost polite. Kage drew slower, his motion unadorned. His blade was practical, its fittings plain. A sword meant to be used, not admired. They faced each other. If this outcast truly fought as brutally as rumor suggested, what would that look like against the finest blade of their generation? The court would soon find out. The first exchange revealed everything. Takamori moved like a lesson in motion, perfect distance, perfect timing, perfect angle. His opening cut was not meant to kill, only to test. The tip of his blade sliced through the air toward Kage's shoulder in a line, so clean. It could have been drawn with ink. Kage didn't parry. He stepped in. Steel bit his shoulder, cutting cloth and skin, but he didn't try to avoid the wound. He let it land where it would do the least real damage and used the stolen distance to drive his own blade forward, an ugly, direct thrust aimed at Takamori's throat. There was no elegance in it, just intent. Takamori barely twisted away in time. The tip of Kage's blade missed his neck by the width of 2 fingers. Gasps broke from the crowd. This was not how samurai duels were supposed to look. There should have been exchanges, flourishes, a gradual escalation. This wasn't a dance. It was an attempted murder. They separated, blood already marking Kage's sleeve. Takamori adjusted his stance, hiding his surprise behind training. You accept injury too easily, he said. A warrior who trades his own flesh for advantage has already lost honor. Kage's smile was a brief crack in stone. Honor is for men whose deaths don't take others with them. His eye, the one that still saw, never left Takamori's hands. I learned that when I was 19. He didn't say. When I drove my father's own sword into his chest. He didn't have to. The words hung between them anyway. Takamori attacked again, faster now. The next minutes blurred into a storm of steel. Each pass left some mark, a cut on Kage's ribs, a bruise forming on Takamori's jaw where Kage's hilt had slammed in. Another slash along Kage's forearm, sweat bright on Takamori's brow. The duel grew more violent, less recognizable as something that belonged in a painting. The observers saw it, even if they couldn't yet name it. Takamori was fighting to prove a system. Kage was fighting like someone who had long since stopped believing systems would save him. And above them both, a deeper tension gathered if the Ronin won. The realm would have to admit that everything it had trusted might not be enough. If he lost, Ayame's choice would be buried along with him. The floor was already streaked with blood when Kage finally did something that made every trained swordsman in the room flinch. He let go of his katana. For a heartbeat, everyone thought Kage had slipped. A samurai releasing his sword in the middle of a duel was not just a mistake. It was an admission of defeat. Several of the onlookers winced in advance. already imagining the clean finishing cut Lord Takamori would deliver to end the absurdity. But that cut never came. Kage didn't simply drop his katana. He dropped it as he stepped in. The sword clattered to the side, forgotten. His suddenly empty hands were no longer bound by the length of steel. In a blur, his right hand closed on Takamori's wrist. His left crashed into the Lord's jaw with the brutal efficiency of a man who had been in far too many fights that never reached for poetry. Takamori staggered, caught off guard by a type of violence that training halls never taught. A murmur passed through the ring of warriors. This wasn't kendo. This was survival. Takamori reacted quickly. His reflexes were still those of a master. He twisted, trying to wrench free, his blade now dangerously close to Kage's side. But Kage was already moving, using his own injured shoulder to jam the nobleman's arm, grinding bone against bone in a way that made several observers unconsciously grip their own joints. There was no honor in that. There was only leverage. Kage's free hand went not for another weapon, but for the tanto at Takamori's waist. The short blade flashed, reversed in his grip. For one terrifying instant, the entire court saw the future clearly. Lord Takamori's blood on the floor. The realm's most celebrated swordsman butchered in the throne room by a nameless Ronin. A civil war of honor that would ignite before the corpse cooled. But Kage did something no one expected. He stabbed down. The blade plunged into the polished floor at Takamori's side, close enough that the nobleman could feel the wind of its passage, but far enough to not cut a hair. Instead, Kage used the embedded knife as an anchor, torquing his body and dragging Takamori with him. The shift ripped the Lord's balance away. They crashed to the ground together, not as duelists, but as animals caught in the final embrace of a hunt. What followed was short, ugly, and impossible to mistake for anything but real. Kage moved like someone who had spent years learning exactly how to choke a man unconscious. With the least wasted motion, his forearm dug into Takamori's throat, his legs locked round the nobleman's waist, controlling the hips that every trained fighter knew were the root of movement. Takamori tried to buck him off, to roll, to elbow. His training kicked in, break the grip, find space, recover the blade. But for the first time in a very long time, technique wasn't enough. Kage didn't fight like a man in a duel. He fought like a man in an alley, at midnight, with no witnesses. Takamori's face turned red, then darker. The sounds he made were not dignified. They were the ugly, human sounds of someone losing air. His hand flailed, then clawed weakly at Kage's arm. Kage adjusted his grip, not to hurt more, but to end faster. Even here, there was a kind of mercy. "Yield," Kage said quietly. It took Takamori several seconds to force enough air through his constricted throat to make a sound. He coughed, choked, swallowed his pride along with blood and saliva. "Yield," the word landed like a dropped banner. Kage released him immediately and rolled away, breathing hard, one hand pressed to his bleeding shoulder. The duel was over. There was no kill, no dramatic finishing blow, just exhaustion, pain, and the undeniable fact that the realm's most refined blade had been beaten by someone who fought like shattered glass given purpose. A long, dangerous silence followed. Every man in the room was forced to confront the same realization. If they had to fight the way Kage fought, how many of them would still be alive? Princess Ayame exhaled only when she saw a move in Takamori's chest. For the first time since she had pointed at Kage, a small thread of doubt loosened in her mind. Not doubt in him, doubt in whether the realm was ready for what he represented. Takamori slowly pushed himself up, hands shaking. Two attendants moved to help him, but he waved them away. Stumbling slightly, he retrieved his fallen katana and sheathed it with a motion that was still, somehow, precise. He turned to the Shogun, then to Ayame, and finally to Kage. There was a moment where everyone held their breath, expecting anger, accusation, and a demand to continue the fight properly. Instead, Takamori bowed. It wasn't deep, it wasn't graceful, but it was real. "I trained to win duels," he said, voice raw, just loud enough to be heard. He trained to survive. His gaze swept the room. "Our world has rewarded one of those more than the other." That line hit harder than any cut he had landed. Master Shinoda stepped forward next, his expression troubled in a way poetry couldn't fix. "Shogun," he said, bowing, "if this duel proved anything, it is not simply that the Ronin is dangerous." His eyes flickered toward Kage, then back. "It proved that our definitions of excellence may no longer fit the world we live in." A few older lords grimaced at that, but no one openly contradicted him. He turned to Ayame. "Princess, earlier I questioned your judgment. I withdraw that doubt." The statement shocked almost as many people as the duel had. Shinoda bowed to Kage as well, not as deeply as to the Shogun, but deeper than one would bow to a tool. "Your methods offend everything I was taught," he said. "But I would rather stand behind a man who knows what real killing is, than in front of an enemy who does." A tension that had been building since Ayame first pointed at Kage now hovered on a knife's edge. The question hung in the air: would the Shogun allow this choice to stand? He rose slowly from the throne, looking not at his advisors, not at the lords, but at his daughter. "Ayame," she met his gaze without flinching. "You chose a man whose existence I kept in shadow," he said. "You forced that shadow into full view." His eyes moved to Kage. "Ronin, you have been my unseen hand for 8 years. Today, everyone has seen what that hand looks like. Do you accept what she has done?" the Shogun asked. "Do you accept being dragged from the dark into a role that will make you a target for every enemy I have, and every enemy I do not yet know about?" Kage stood there, bleeding, bruised, tired. A part of him wanted to say no, to step back into the corridors, the alleys, the mountain passes where his work was simple: find threat, remove threat, disappear. But as his remaining eye passed over the circle of warriors, some hostile, some thoughtful, some unsettled, he realized something. If he stepped back now, nothing would change. The court would remain beautiful and fragile. The next crisis would come, and some other shadow would have to do what he did. He'd just be one more ghost. So he bowed, not deeply, not submissively, but with deliberate intention. "I accept," he said, then added, because it was the only honest thing he could say, "Whether I deserve it or not is something the future will decide." Ayame's lips tightened, not in frustration, in something dangerously close to relief. The Shogun studied him for a long moment. "Very well," he said. "Then let the court bear witness. My daughter has chosen not just a husband, but a question." A faint, humorless smile touched his mouth. "We will see what answer the world gives us." The tension in the room did not vanish. It simply shifted, changing shape, because outside the palace walls, far beyond the reach of ceremonial drums, another kind of drum was already beating, the sound of marching feet. And the next time Kage's skills were tested, it would not be in a circle of polished wood, but on the edge of a war no one in that hall yet knew was coming. The echoes of the duel had barely faded when a cry tore through the palace corridors. Not fear, urgency. Guards straightened instantly. The doors to the throne room burst open, and a soldier stumbled inside, dust and sweat streaking his armor, the look of a man who had ridden beyond exhaustion. He dropped to his knees so hard the impact rattled through the chamber. "Shogun, Lord Ishida, he's marching south." An army. The Shogun descended a single step from his daze. Every conversation died. Even Takamori, still bruised and unsteady from the duel, went rigid. "How many?" 14 to 16,000, my lord." Advancing at speed, shock rippled through the ranks of nobles and warriors. Several exchanged horrified glances. Ishida was a patient strategist, a man who preferred waiting years for the perfect moment. Apparently, the perfect moment was now. Ryu the Dragon stepped forward, jaw clenched. He waited for the tournament, when our best warriors were gathered here and the borders stripped of strength. Ayame felt something cold coil in her chest. Everything that had happened inside the palace, the scandal, the duel, the whispers, suddenly felt painfully small. The Shogun's voice remained steady. "Where are his scouts?" "Captured," the messenger said. "They confirmed he intends to strike the capital." The claim drew a wave of disbelief. Attacking the capital first was suicide. Every tactician knew that. A quiet voice cut across the room. "He won't attack the capital." Kage stepped forward. He didn't bow. He didn't ask permission. He simply walked toward the enormous tactical map on the far wall, A map most nobles only stood before during festivals when pretending to admire strategy. Kage didn't admire it. He dissected it. Ishida isn't a fool, he said, tracing his finger across the northern provinces. He'll cut the routes that feed the capital first. He tapped 3 marked locations, supply depots, relay stations, a mountain pass. He'll take these. Whoever controls them controls the city's throat. Takamori frowned, still nursing the bruises along his jaw. Why now? Why at all? Kage didn't hesitate. Because today the palace lowered its guard. Because patrols were reassigned to guard nobles, not boarders. Because today you followed tradition instead of reason. Several courtiers stiffened at the bluntness, but no one openly challenged him. The shogun regarded him with a level, unreadable expression. What would you do? Kage's remaining I tracked the war lines across the map. I'd stop reacting like a government and start reacting like something he fears. A murmur rolled through the chamber. Even Ayame felt her breath catch. Kage pointed again, not at the enemy positions, but at the circle of 20 warriors still standing from the tournament. You already have 20 strike teams. The room stilled. The shogun's tone sharpened. Explain. These men came prepared to fight, Kage said. They brought swords, horses, retainers. They're ready. They expected duels. They can deliver raids. He pointed to Takamori. He can take the western depot to Shinoda. He can cut their communication line to Yukimura. He can dismantle their vanguard. Kage stepped back, his voice low but firm. Send them now. Not as an army, Ishida expects that, but as 20 knives. The strategy stunned even the battle-hardened commanders. Ryu crossed his arms. It's reckless, fragmented, dangerous, so is Ishida, Kage replied. Ayame saw the shift in the room, a slow, almost reluctant acceptance that what made Kage terrifying in a duel made him indispensable in a crisis. The shogun finally spoke. Prepare the strike forces. Gasps broke through the hall. Orders followed immediately, the polished calm of the palace dissolving into urgent, purposeful motion. For the first time since the messenger arrived, Ayame let out a breath. She turned toward Kage. You'll coordinate all 20 teams alone, she said quietly. He didn't look at her. I know. His eyes stayed on the map, as if searching its lines for dangers invisible to everyone else. She hesitated, and if Ishida anticipated this, Kage finally met her gaze, and for a brief moment she saw the part of him the court hadn't glimpsed yet, not the killer, not the strategist, but the man who carried weight for which there was no ceremony. Then we're already too late, he said. He said it without fear, without drama, just truth. Ayame suddenly understood why she had chosen him. Not because he was stronger than the others, not because he was more violent, but because he saw reality clearly, even when others hid behind ritual. And now reality was coming for them. As the last samurai sprinted from the hall to prepare their men, a wind swept through the open doors, carrying with it the distant thrum of drums, drums that did not belong to the palace. Were drums. Kage's jaw tightened. The shogun's eyes narrowed. Ayame's heart hammered in her chest. The next time blades were drawn, they would not clash over marriage or prestige. They would clash over the survival of the realm itself. Before dawn, the palace emptied of its greatest warriors. Lanterns swayed in the wind as 20 elite strike teams mounted their horses and vanished into the dark like arrows shot from the same bow. Hooves thundered across stone and earth, fading into the distance until only the cold morning air remained. Inside the palace, a different kind of battle began. One fought not with blades, but with decisions. Kage stood over the tactical map like a general carved from stone, blood drying along his shoulder, head slightly bowed as he listened to reports arriving faster than scribes could write. The first messenger arrived just after sunrise. Lord Takamori struck the western depot, destroyed completely. Enemy resistance is minimal. A murmur swept through the commanders gathered near the map. Takamori had moved at impressive speed. His precision was undeniable. His victory was overwhelming, almost too overwhelming. Kage didn't say anything yet, but he didn't celebrate either. Then came the second report. Master Shinoda severed the communication chain. The relay station is in ruins. No casualties among his men, The Shogun raised an eyebrow, impressed. Shinoda, a poet with a commander's mind, had achieved something far more difficult than any duel. Destroying a communication network required coordination, timing, and stealth. It should have taken hours, maybe a day. It had taken 30 minutes. Ayame glanced at Kage. He hadn't moved. Another rider burst through the hall. Champion Yukimura eliminated the scout command post. The enemy fled before his men even arrived. Now the murmurs shifted, awe turning into unease. 3 victories, 3 perfect outcomes, 0 resistance. Ayame approached Kage quietly. "Isn't this good news?" Kage didn't answer immediately. His eye moved across the map, tracing invisible threads no one else could see. Then he spoke. "This is wrong." The Shogun stepped closer. "Explain." Kage tapped the western depot first. "Takamori should have met a garrison here." He tapped the relay station. "Shinoda's strike should have cost lives." He tapped the scout post last. "Yukimura should have fought a delaying force at minimum." He finally looked up. These positions were abandoned. The room shifted. Even the wind outside seemed to hold its breath. Ayame's voice was barely a whisper. "Why?" Kage exhaled slowly, as though he'd been resisting the answer. "Because we weren't hitting Ishida's real defenses." He stepped back from the map. "We were hitting bait." A wave of cold dread moved through the hall. Ryu swore under his breath. He wanted us to strike. He wanted to see how fast we could move. Which commanders moved where? Which teams were capable of what? Kage pointed at the 3 successful sites. These victories told him exactly who was leading each strike and where they'd go next. Ayame felt her stomach twist. "Then the teams in the field." Kage nodded grimly. "They're walking into traps." A breathless silence crashed over the room. Another rider stumbled in, armor cracked, blood dried at his temple. He nearly collapsed but forced himself upright long enough to speak. Champion Yukimura. Surrounded, ambushed, heavy casualties, his knees buckled. Guards caught him before he hit the ground. The impact of his words hit even harder. The Shogun's voice cut through the rising panic. "Recall them." Now, Kage was already shaking his head. Messages won't reach them in time. He moved quickly, marking an arc on the map with his fingertip. "Ishida's main force is here, waiting for our fastest teams to overextend. They'll strike Yukimura, Hideaki, and Tanaka simultaneously. They expect us to reinforce. They want us to send help." Ayame stared at him. "So we don't." Kage's expression hardened. "If we chase his trap, we lose everything." He pointed to a spot deep in Ishida's territory, far from the capital. "This is where he'll be. His headquarters, his command spine." Ryu frowned. "Even if true, that location would be fortified. Not during an active trap. He'll be surrounded by only essential staff, focused entirely on crushing our strike teams. His guard will be minimal, because he believes we're too busy panicking." General murmurs rose again, this time darker. Ayame realized what Kage was implying before anyone else. To save the armies, to save the capital, to save the realm, someone would have to go where no one else could go. Not a team, not an army, one man. Her voice trembled despite her effort to steady it. "Kage, you cannot be thinking." He didn't answer her. He removed his blood-stained haori instead, revealing bandages already seeping red across his torso. "I'm the only one who can reach him in time." The hall erupted, objections, protests, warnings, but Kage ignored them all. Ayame stepped directly in his path, eyes sharp, breath shaking. "This is suicide." "Maybe, not maybe," her voice cracked. "Ishida will have a dozen men inside his tent, and you're already wounded. I've done worse with less. That's not comforting." Kage paused. For the first time since the duel, she saw hesitation, not fear, but gravity. If Yukimura's team falls, Ishida wins the pass. If he wins the pass, he controls the capital. Thousands die. His voice softened. One life is the smallest price. Ayame felt her throat tighten. She reached into her hair, removing a single ornate pin, jade and gold, carved with a pattern her grandmother once described as the memory of spring. She pressed it into his hand. "Take this." Kage frowned slightly. "Why?" "So that if they find your body, they'll know you belong to someone." He closed his fingers around the pin, holding it like a secret. The Shogun approached, his expression unreadable. "Ronin," he said, can you do this?" Kage didn't look away from Ayame. "I can try, and if you fail, then Ishida will have no one left to fear." He turned, heading for the doors. Ayame watched him go, heart pounding so hard she could barely breathe. The palace had seen duels. It had seen betrayal. It had seen ambition. But what was about to happen would decide more than honor or lineage. For the first time in a century, a single man was marching alone toward the heart of a war, and the entire fate of the realm marched with him. Kage left the palace as the sun began to bleed into the horizon. He did not take a horse. A horse could be tracked. A horse left a trail. He traveled on foot, moving faster than most men could ride, following paths no scout would consider, slipping between forests, through riverbeds, across broken ground where even bandits hesitated to tread. By dusk, he was deep in Ishida's territory. By nightfall, he could already hear the warlord's army. A forest of torchlights stretched across the hills, thousands of soldiers bivouacked in long rows, their banners snapping in the wind. The camp spanned the valley like a living creature, vast and hungry. Kage crouched behind a rise in the terrain, studying patrol patterns. Soldiers laughed, ate, and sharpened blades. Others huddled around fires, unaware that a single shadow among the trees was calculating their blind spots. He drew a slow breath. Every step from here had to be silent, not merely quiet, silent in the way forgotten things were silent. He slipped into the camp. He became smoke. Two guards walked past him at arm's length, talking about the tournament in the capital. They didn't notice the figure pressed against the back of a supply wagon, nor the faint glimmer of a hairpin tucked inside his inner robe. Kage moved again. A patrol crossed his path. He waited until one soldier turned to spit, and in that precise heartbeat, he crossed behind them. He blended into darkness that wasn't there moments before. The closer he got to the center of the camp, the more he felt the tension in the air shift. Here, the campfires burned brighter. Here, the tents stood taller. Here, the guards were sharper, veterans, not levies. And at the heart of it all stood Ishida Kodo. His command tent rose like a fortress of silk, guarded by elite soldiers in full armor. Their posture, their discipline, the faint metallic rasp each time they shifted, these were not ceremonial men. These were killers. Kage counted them. 8 guards outside. More inside, at least for officers, possibly Ishida's personal retinue. Any other man would have retreated. Kage moved forward, a rustle of cloth, a glint of steel. 2 guards fell with barely a whisper, their throats opened by a single, precise motion. Kage dragged their bodies behind a stack of crates, took one man's cloak, and walked toward the tent like he belonged there. Inside, voices murmured. He pushed the flap aside. Ishida sat at a low table surrounded by maps and commanders. His presence was immediate, the controlled stillness of a man who believed the world was already his. His armor lay nearby, black lacquered plates polished to a mirror sheen. He was relaxed. He shouldn't have been. Kage stepped inside without announcing himself. 2 commanders reached for their blades. They were too slow. Kage's tanto flashed out, crossing the space between them in a brutal arc. One man collapsed with a gurgle, clutching his throat. The second fell with his eyes still wide in surprise. The remaining officers surged to their feet. Kage threw himself into them. The tent erupted into steel. Kage parried a spear thrust with the forearm of a dying officer, drove his dagger into the attacker's ribs, pivoted, ducked under a horizontal swing, and drove his shoulder into another man's chest hard enough to crack ribs. Pain tore through his wounded side. He didn't slow. A 4th soldier grabbed him from behind. Kage snapped his head back, felt bone break under the impact, and twisted free. 3 more men rushed him. He killed 2 before he realized the 3rd wasn't attacking at all. He was stalling. Then Kage saw the shadow behind him. He spun too late. A sword slammed across his ribs. Kage's breath exploded from his lungs. The force of the blow sent him crashing into a wooden post supporting the tent. His vision sparked. He tasted blood. Ishida stepped into view. He wasn't wearing armor, only a commander's robe. But he held a long knife with the ease of someone who had killed with it before. "You made it far," Ishida said calmly. "Too far." Impressive, foolish, admirable. Kage tried to rise. Another soldier struck him behind the knee. He collapsed. 8 men pinned him down. Someone kicked the knife from his grip. Ishida crouched in front of him, studying the scars, the ruined eye, the expressionless mask of a man who refused to die quietly. "You're the shadow," Ishida murmured. The Shogun's unspoken curse. He smiled. "Good. I prefer killing important men." He drove his fist into Kage's jaw. Darkness surged. Kage awoke tied to a central pole, wrists bound with thick rope, legs pinned by 2 soldiers. His wounds burned. Blood soaked the bandages across his torso. His head throbbed. Ishida sat on a stool, sipping tea. "You killed 7 of my commanders tonight. A simple observation, not a boast. Not bad for one man. Not enough to win." Kage said nothing. Another commander stepped forward. "Tell us where the remaining strike teams are positioned." Kage stared past him as if the man didn't exist. The commander slapped him. "Tell us." Kage didn't blink. Hours passed, beatings, questions, silence. Kage endured. Eventually, Ishida waved his men off for stop. He walked closer. "Do you know why your princess chose you?" Kage didn't lift his head. "Because she is a strategist disguised as a dutiful daughter," Ishida continued, circling him. "She saw something in you. Something useful." He crouched. "I see it too." He leaned closer. "You're a weapon." Kage let out a slow breath. "So are you?" Ishida smiled faintly. "Yes. But the difference is simple." He gestured around them. "My blade didn't break." Kage looked up then, his single eye clear, unbroken. "Not yet." Ishida almost laughed, and then the shouting started. Outside. Dozens of voices. Metal clashing. Panic. The tent flap burst open. A soldier stumbled in, blood streaming down his arms. Lord Ishida. The men, they're fighting each other. The command chain collapse. Chaos. Ishida's face snapped toward him. Kage lowered his head and finally smiled, a small, tired, devastating smile. He had not broken. He had broken them. Ishida whirled on him. "What did you do?" Kage met his gaze. "I killed the right men first." At that moment, the entire tent shuddered. A new figure appeared at the entrance. Yukimura, armor cracked, blood on his cheek, breathing like a man who had run through fire. "Ronin," he growled, "you're a terrible informant. But the timing, perfect. Then we're getting you out of here." Kage's head finally fell back against the post. Not in defeat, not in relief, just in exhaustion. Ishida drew his sword with a roar, but the tent collapsed inward as Yukimura's men stormed through. The last thing Kage felt before darkness claimed him wasn't fear. It was the weight of the hairpin pressed against his chest. Kage drifted somewhere between darkness and fire. He wasn't dead. Death was colder than this. This warmth was familiar, the kind that spread after losing too much blood. A strange, heavy comfort. The kind that told a man to sleep even when sleep meant never waking. But there were voices. Hands on him, movement. He felt stone under his back, leather straps across his chest, something wet pressed into his wounds. Then another voice, sharp, commanding, entirely unwilling to let him belong to the dark. Ayame's. The first thing Kage truly saw when he surfaced again was her face above him, streaked with exhaustion. She looked as though she hadn't slept for days. The soft lantern light made her seem unreal, like a memory leaning close to him. Her hand trembled as she touched his cheek, not the ruined side, but the good one. The one that still belonged more to the man he had been than the weapon he had become. "You came back," she whispered. His voice was barely air. "You gave me something to return." The hairpin, still at his chest, still warm. Ayame let out a breath she had been keeping locked inside her ribs. He tried to sit up. The pain that followed made the world dissolve at the edges. She pushed him gently back onto the bedding. "You're not moving for at least 2 days," she said, not as an order, but as a truth. Kage closed his eyes for a moment. He could hear the muffled chaos beyond the room. Healers moving, armored men reporting, scribes rushing to copy urgent messages. The entire palace was a storm. Ayame's voice cut through it softly. "Ishida's army has collapsed. His death, whatever happened in that tent, it broke them. His commanders turned on each other. His men fled. The invasion is over." Kage exhaled slowly. He hadn't planned victory. He had planned to remove a monster. What came after was the realm's problem, not his. But Ayame wasn't finished. The shogun summoned the court. They want to honor you publicly. Kage opened his eyes. The look he gave her said everything before he spoke. I was never meant for their spotlight. Ayame understood that look, but she also understood something Kage didn't. His existence in the shadows had run its course. She squeezed his hand. Wait for my father, and she left. The room felt heavier without her. Moments later, the shogun entered alone. He dismissed the guards with a gesture, then stood beside Kage's bedding. He looked down at the Ronin who had been his hidden weapon for 8 years, the man he'd used, the man he'd needed, the man he had never thanked. There was silence first, not discomfort, respect. Then the shogun spoke. Ronin, you've done what armies could not. You saved this realm, at the cost of yourself. Kage tried to answer, but the shogun raised a hand. Listen. He unfurled a scroll marked with the Shogunate seal. I am restoring your name. Kage's breath caught. From this day forward, you are Takeda Kenshin once more. Your father's crime died with him. Your mother's shame ends today. Your clan lives again, through you. Kage stared at the ceiling. If he had the strength, maybe he would have laughed. Or broken, or both. The shogun lowered to a knee, an act that shocked even Kage. I will not have a man save my throne only to live the rest of his life in exile. Kage finally found his voice. A name does not change what I am. The shogun shook his head. It changes what the world can do to you. He placed the scroll beside him. And it changes what my daughter's choice means. Kage felt heat start in his chest, a different kind of pain. Ayame deserves someone whole. The shogun smiled faintly. Whole men break too easily. He stood again, clasping his hands behind his back. You are the future of this realm. Not because you are perfect, but because you survived everything that tried to destroy you. With that, he left, and Kage realized the realm had shifted while he was bleeding in Ishida's camp. Thank you for staying with me until this point. Your time means a lot. If you haven't yet, please like the video, subscribe, and share it with someone who enjoys stories from feudal Japan. That simple gesture helps the channel more than you can imagine. The wedding came weeks later. Not because tradition demanded it. Tradition had been bent, shattered, rebuilt already. But because Ayame refused to delay the life she had chosen. And the shogun refused to watch the court whisper behind her back. The ceremony was both quieter and louder than expected. Quieter in form, no parade of nobles, no endless displays of wealth. Louder in meaning, because the 20 warriors who had once competed for her hand now stood as witnesses, not rivals. Takamori approached Kage first. His jaw had healed, but a faint shadow of the bruise still remained, a reminder of the day the world tilted. He bowed, not deeply, but deeply enough. I trained to master precision, Takamori said. You trained to master survival. You humbled me, and in doing so, you strengthened me. Kage nodded once. Shinoda followed. Your existence has forced the realm to confront truths we hid behind poetry. He offered a small smile. I owe you for that. Yukimura came last, arms crossed. You owe me a drink, he grunted. Then added, and next time you walk alone into a war camp, I'm coming with you. Kage huffed a quiet breath, the closest he came to laughing. Then Ayame appeared. Her wedding robe wasn't the traditional pattern of cranes or blossoms. It was white with subtle threads of gray, like distant clouds, the kind of sky that follows a storm. She reached up and placed the restored hairpin in her hair, the same pin he had carried into Ishida's tent, now repaired, but still bearing a faint scar where steel had bent it. This is what we are, she said softly. Not perfect, but repaired with intention. Kage looked at her, really looked at her. He wasn't a shadow anymore. He wasn't an exile. He wasn't a weapon. He was a man standing beside a woman who had seen his truth long before he could bear to name it. When they bowed to each other and rose again, the court did something no one expected. They bowed to him. Not because he was handsome. Not because he came from a great clan. Not because they wanted to flatter a new political power. They bowed because the Ronin, who had lived unwanted in the corners of their palace, had saved their lives, had saved their realm, had shown them a future they didn't know they needed. Years later, children would hear the story. 20 samurai fought for the shogun's daughter, the elders would say, and she chose the man no clan would claim. But the story never ended there. Because the child always asked, "Why him?" And the elder would smile with the weight of remembered history. Because sometimes the man who walks in shadow, they'd reply, is the only one who can see what the light hides. And if you'd like to continue this journey, click the card appearing on your screen. I've chosen another story you'll enjoy. I'll meet you there.